You've had some issues getting into the country, is that correct?
I can't say too much because trans activists, they pay attention to stuff like this and they figure out things they can do to screw with you. I recently went back on anti-anxiety medication because I kind of had to, because when the book came out, it was sort of like being re-cancelled because people took a chance to say what they think of me everywhere they could.
Is that what you're trying to do in your latest book, in your memoir, Tough Crowd? Are you trying to give your own voice and to counter everything that you can find online?
Yeah. When journalists talked about me, they misrepresented me. There's so far over 75 hit pieces written. And my editor said, you have a good story to tell it. When I did get to the GC stuff, to the women's rights stuff, that's when I actually felt my mood lightening. Wrote the end of the book just feeling lighter and lighter and lighter, and then I released it.
So what was it about your childhood that led to you being a gender-critical feminist and activist in this space?
I've always been left-wing. I think when you're young and you read a lot and you're vaguely intellectual, feminism seems also, and I promise you this wasn't the only reason, but you would meet interesting girls,
Smart girls. Confident.
Girls who didn't take any shit. At the same time, I believed all these things. I was kind of interested in the subject itself, but why I felt so strongly the other way and why that changed and so on. So I've always been kind of examining what I believe and why I believe it. And also my dad, he was a big believer in chivalry, respecting women and being aware of the fact that they're physically, on average, not as strong as men. It's just an instinctive thing. So when I saw people starting to bully women online because they believed in the reality of biology and single-sex spaces, protecting kids, I just saw red, as I always do when I see bullying, I was bullied at school as well, so that added to it.
Can you explain a bit about what's been happening in the UK and about the Cass Review?
All I know so far is that they've come to the conclusion that social transitioning, which is adopting opposite-sex pronouns for a young child, has grave psychological consequences. So that's massive. That's like, every teacher, every school, BBC's children's programs, all of these are products across the institutions and institutions across society have all been singing from the same hymn sheet. That social transitioning is what you do to alleviate the suffering of children with dysphoria. Me and the TERFs, we always knew that it was nonsense. I kind of said, I remember on a Newsnight program when I was being interviewed about it by a very hostile interviewer, I finally managed to get a word in and I said, you don't tell children that they could be born in the wrong body because they're children and they will believe you. And this is what we've had. We've had the equivalent of adults telling children a very harmful version of the Santa story is true well into their adulthood. It's a mass psychosis, a mass delusion. These parents have been infecting their kids with it. And I just think that when these kids realize that they were told such a damaging lie, like, for instance, the Mayo Clinic has recently revealed that puberty blockers produce stones in testes of young kids that can turn into cancer. When these kids realize that their parents and the whole of society has been lying to them, I'm really worried about what that's going to do.
And we'll start to see it in the next few decades, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then how will these parents deal with knowing that they've possibly sterilized their children?
All sorts of things that they don't get, the BBC, The Guardian, The Independent, they simply don't report on these things because they all have someone in the office who's either non-binary themselves or has a non-binary child. And they know that if they even begin to open their mouths about these subjects, that they may lose their jobs. It's enabled a strata of society that I think has always been there and is there and comes up in different places at different times. You had the Khmer Rouge, who were killing people who wore glasses. You had the Cultural Revolution. All of these movements empower the policing class. And when you give them power, they'll misuse it, That's what this movement did. It gave a certain kind of sadistic, malicious, curtain-twitching gossip sudden power over the rest of their friends and their social circles and so on, All these reports that you mentioned, Cass report, the Mayo Clinic findings, all of these things prove that we were absolutely right all along. And all these people who encouraged their friends to break off contact, people in their social circle, to dehumanize them and cancel them and all that sort of stuff. They are the villains of history. I do think we should offer what's called a golden bridge to a lot of people, because I think that some of the parents who did this to their kids, they did so under a lot of pressure. They had the whole of society telling them it was the right thing to do. And meanwhile, their kids were repeating the line that they would commit suicide if they weren't allowed to do it. They've got to be offered every consideration, every sympathy. But the people who took pleasure in policing it, they need to be named and shamed and never listened to again. But the way I put it is we should shun the influencers, arrest the doctors, and protect the survivors, you know?
Check out this really amazing and entertaining podcast. Also, this book. And I'm sick.